Well, welcome everyone to the February GEBL meeting. I'm excited to have Matt Wurst from Audacity Brewing joining us this evening, and we're going to talk a little bit about his background, and then maybe more importantly, get to try some of his wonderful beer and talk through all of the fun things that are involved with it. So welcome, Matt. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm honored to be here and talking to some local homebrewers. It's always exciting.
Right on. So how about if you kind of walk us through how you started homebrewing and how you got into brewing just in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think my story is pretty similar to a lot of people. I received a 5-gallon bucket and an airlock and a crappy recipe kit back in Christmas 2008 from my brother Jason. Some of you have met him if you came into the brewery for our first stretch. He was like behind the bar. So kind of stoked the fire, got the passion going. But yeah, used an old ceramic camping pot for my kettle, and then ice bath for chilling. And that was kind of the start of it. I used spring water because we lived in Las Vegas at the time. The water there is notoriously bad for brewing. So it's definitely factored into like my approach early on. Yeah, then I switched to all grain brewing not too long after that, maybe like a year to a year and a half. That's pretty much it. I mean, I made little improvements here and there just to, I guess, up my game, so to speak. Started developing my own recipes, started kegging, that's a big one. I had some converted corny kegs that I used as fermentation vessels, basically. And then I could transfer under pressure. That was a huge jump in quality there. And also the ability to temperature control to a degree, not what people have now, where they have like the full, almost like a full scale like commercial brewery, but in miniature. The technology's definitely improved since I was an avid home brewer. Yeah.
As you started, and like all of us with buckets and learning how important various portions of the brew process is, what were some of the challenges that you saw right off the bat?
Yeah, I think, man, so much goes into it. Temperature control is a big one. Just general cleanliness, being rigorous with that. Using maybe substandard ingredients at times, just because Las Vegas is not a mecca for brewing, but it's also not really a mecca for home brewing. I used to have to drive. We had one homebrew shop in the whole valley. I'd drive 50 minutes to go there. And this was a little bit before I discovered that you could just source all this stuff online. And now it's improved leaps and bounds, access to materials and stuff. But yeah, I would make the drive 45 minutes each way to pick stuff up. And that was until another shop opened close by to where our side of the valley. What else was a challenge? I mean, just a lack of knowledge, stylistically, and yeah, basically just doing my due diligence with learning the right way to do stuff and not taking shortcuts. Sometimes as a home brewer, it can be tempting to do that. And I noticed every single time when I went and took the short route, the beer was of lesser quality.
Yeah, certainly patience and being over zealous on cleanliness is certainly a big deal, and something I think that you need to keep reminding yourself. I mean, even if you get into a rhythm, you keep having to remind ourselves, okay, got to make sure everything's cleaned and everything's ready to go. Did you have a moment where you kind of got where a light bulb just went off and you're like, okay, now I get it, and now I'm able to start as a home brewer, start to repeatedly get good beer out of my buckets?
It wasn't any one moment in time. It was definitely like little improvements to equipment, to process. Definitely like when I started developing my own recipes as opposed to following like a clone recipe or even using a kit early on, like just kind of seeing how the interplay of you know what grains or hops you're using or even yeast strain, how that could change what you know what the finished product or finished beer was like. So just getting that experience of playing around. I mean, that's the essence of homebrewing is, in my mind, you're free to experiment and you're free to get as involved in it as you want to be. For example, my father-in-law, Bill, he's a avid homebrewer, but he's never done all grain. He has like 5 recipes that he's made that he based off of other beers, commercial examples, and he loves those beers, and that's what he brews consistently, and he's okay with that, and he likes the ease of extract. So, but for me, it was making the leap to all grain for sure, and the development part of it in terms of recipes, because then you start learning the ins and outs of the numbers.
You talked a little bit about kind of brewing knowledge and getting to, you know, maybe get more, learning more. So maybe walk us through kind of the next steps you took in your education and how you got on the path that you did, taking the courses and classes that you took.
Yeah, I mean, pretty early on, like the passion was there. Like 2010, I went to GABF for the first time, and was overwhelmed then with the number of breweries and the number of beers in Denver, and basically like limited myself to non-West Coast beers at that event, and got to try stuff from all around the country. We made our first trip to the Northwest that same year and fell in love with the Northwest, which is why we eventually moved up this way. But so the passion was there pretty early on. But I think that the turning point in terms of like the seed that would be, like I could brew professionally, kind of got planted. I had just graduated college in 2012 and went to work for my first software gig. I was doing software support, and it was night shift. So it's just, we were recently married. I never got to see my wife. It was miserable. And that kind of like, I guess, like I said earlier, planted the seed of like doing something that I'm passionate about for a living. Not that I'm not passionate about software or technology, but it just wasn't to the same degree. So I think my wife recognized that, and we had talked about like, well, what could the future hold? And I started looking into like schools that offered training in brewing. I think UC Davis has always had a pretty sterling reputation. They were one of the first universities to offer a fermentation sciences program. I didn't really feel like going through another 4-year undergrad program, but they do offer some really great like continuing education courses. And then at the same time, I had my eye on going to like a more longer term program. So the ones that jumped out to me was GEBL Institute in Chicago, which partners with, I think, the Doman's Academy in I think Munich. And then also in the UK, there was, and back then there wasn't as many options, but BrewLab in the UK. And what it came down to for me was like, I had family in Chicago. So I could have like stayed with the family. I could have, but I'd been there so many times. And I was like, well, if I could spend a few months in the United Kingdom, like that's kind of like a deal breaker for me. Like it's a unique experience. So almost simultaneously, I enrolled in the practical brewing course at Davis, and then 2 months later took off for the UK. So it was kind of like I had quit that software company, gone to work in IT as an IT tech, and I was very forthcoming with my new boss, like, hey, I'm going to leave for a stretch and go do this, and he was cool about it. So it was a wonderful opportunity. As one of the coolest experiences of my life, that's for sure.
And as you come back then from that education and all of that experience around there, I'm assuming it was a tremendous help in not just your knowledge, but understanding on the day-to-day, right?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, one thing, it was a unique perspective because it was very, you could call it like Eurocentric. It was very like cask ales had a resurgence even before that time, but it was in full effect at that time. So everything I was drinking over there was cask ale. They don't use trike clamps. They use din fittings quite a bit. They're not cylinder or conical vessels for the fermenters. A lot of them rely on like just a CO2 blanket in what I would consider an open fermenter. But I mean, it would have a lid, but it wasn't like pressure rated tanks by any means. So I got to do a lot of placements in places like that, and it gave me a unique perspective on professional brewing in a different country. But yeah, when I returned, the downside was I did a lot of sensory analysis over there. So immediately when I came back, the thing that hit me was like I would taste a beer and just judge the crap out of it. And I was like, oh no, is this going to ruin my ability to enjoy beer? But luckily, like the brewing industry's kept pace. There's so many like breweries nowadays. Like if you don't like one brewery's specific beer or like the whole range, like there's other options. So it didn't last long. From a brewing perspective, I definitely noticed an improvement across the board, like in every aspect of it. But another downside to it was like having done a lot of commercial placement when I was there, I tended to not homebrew as frequently. I think because I already had it in my mind, like eventually I was going to make the leap to go pro. And I figured like, is there a lot of carryover between homebrewing and commercial brewing? At the time, I didn't think so. Now having, gone through the process, I can say there's definitely some overlap. But I kind of took my foot off the pedal for a few years there in homebrewing, and really only did it to try out like new ingredients, I didn't really like develop recipes with the intention of them becoming what we've worked into the rotation here. So it's kind of, I guess you'd call it like a dark period where I was just working and not homebrewing a lot. But our plan, we moved to after I went through the schooling, we moved up to the Northwest. So I was content to just be a consumer for a while. There's so many wonderful breweries in Portland, and we do trips up here, mainly to the Seattle area. So yeah, I just enjoyed that. And but I think like in the back of our minds, we always wanted to explore the option of opening our own place. And so we kind of just really slowly started working towards that.
So as you talk about going into the decision to open your own place and all that surrounds that and the challenges there, the other challenge that may be unique to you and a few others, opening during a pandemic. So maybe can you walk us through that step where you decided, okay, we're gonna do it. We're gonna go from home brewing to we're gonna open a place, and then you're hitting the face with the stuff with the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't recommend opening a brewery during a pandemic. It's I think that I always tell myself, like, I think a worst scenario would be to open it like right before it, where you start getting in the swing of things and you don't have the ability to, I guess pivot would be the ideal word, or change like what your business model is. So in a way, we are lucky. We started it up. I mean, we purchased the equipment from Co2 Brewing in January of 2020. We signed the lease in February, and then we moved up in March, and then a week later was the first shutdown for that. So we didn't really get to like explore the area too much. We didn't start meeting people. We just kind of hit the ground running. Like I stayed working through June. My wife still works a regular job. So we, in our free time, I'd work. Luckily, we stayed in a small little apartment right next door to the brewery. So I could pop down here and work on some projects and then go back. But it did take us like, let's see, about 8 months to get it to the point where we were ready to open the tap room. Some of that was, I'd like to blame it on like TTB licensing, because historically that's like what people have horror stories about. But I think we got our TTB application processed in record time. It was like 2 weeks or something like that. But it was just, kind of seeing how things were going to shake out a little bit. But right now, I mean, it's all we've ever really known as a business. So we just keep ourselves informed of what like the state guidelines are, so that we make sure we're in compliance with that. We can't really afford any sort of, fine due to that. So it's definitely like always on our minds, as well as like the safety of our customers and of us and our staff, which it's a small team. I mean, but it's still, it's something we think about a lot, but it hasn't really stopped us from thinking about the future of the brewery. We just are approaching it with a little bit more, conservative, like growth approach. And we try and just enjoy like what's in the moment. And sometimes it's tough to do that because we're so busy, but I think that's important.
What was the biggest jump from homebrewing to pro brewing that you think would be good for everyone on this call to know?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. I mean, every system is different, whether it's home brewery or commercial. There's little intricacies. What might work process-wise for one space might not work at another. So it was kind of like familiarizing myself with the equipment from Lost Canoe, making upgrades where it needed it, which was a lot of it, to be honest. And just dialing in how I wanted to go about doing certain things, but almost using theirs as like a template. So I ask myself all the time, would it have been better to start with a blank canvas and like just do it how I think it should be done? Or was it better to kind of see in this footprint, in this building, what they had started with and what we could improve upon? And I go back and forth on it. I don't think there's a real answer. But that's certainly one of them, like just having a familiarity with your equipment. There's little things like fittings and stuff. The CIP process on tanks, I imagine, is much more in-depth than, although, yeah, there's a lot of really impressive homebrew equipment right now. So, we're at the size we're at, on the hot side anyway, it's only a 1.5 barrel system. So it's really not that big of a jump from what a lot of people use for homebrewing nowadays. The fermenters are a little bit bigger because I think that they were in the process of upgrading when they decided to buy Sound of Summit Brewery, and then later on closed, and they never quite finished the upgrade. But we are looking to do that in the next like 2 months here, which we're really excited about. But all that's really going to let us do is fill our 5 barrel fermenters to capacity. And so it's a needed needed upgrade for sure.
We were talking a little bit earlier about some of the different types of beers that you generally tend to have on tap. And what's interesting with the things that you do, which I think are different than some of the standard breweries, is that you never have you don't see a consistent beer on tap. It's always something new, always something that's has a different spin on it. Can you tell me a little bit about your kind of philosophy on that and why you chose to go in that direction?
Yeah, I'll touch on it a little bit more when we go into like the tasting and like the hop pairing part of it, but I think that with how many breweries there are in the US now, it's tough to stand out. I know a lot of breweries in the area, they make a great Kolsch, a great West Coast IPA. So it becomes at that point a challenge to, you're either providing an experience for somebody, and that's like the highlight of going there, or you're experimenting a little bit, or maybe putting something out that is a fresh take on how to do it. I really have enjoyed doing, like, we've done a few adjunct light beers. For example, we did a blonde ale with honey and graham cracker, with the intent of it tasting kind of like like Teddy Grahams. We also did a cream ale, but instead of using corn in the grain bill, I used oats, smoothed out the mouthfeel a little bit, and we used toasted marshmallow and vanilla bean, with the intent of that tasting like a Little Debbie cream pie. So it's kind of stuff like that where just, yeah, maybe, how do you say it? Like playing around a little bit. And at our size, we have the ability to do that. It's not a huge investment for us to play around. I mean, luckily we haven't had anything turn out too bad. I'm sure people have opinions on every beer we've released, but if we were a 20-barrel brewery and we had to make that investment, we better damn well know that that beer is going to turn out fantastic. Especially with how bootstrapped we are. Like we don't have a huge budget, so the size is advantageous to us in that regard.
Is there a certain style or technique that you find really interesting and exciting, that's maybe it is inspiring you in some of your most recent recipes?
Man, I have a real reverence for like classical styles done really well. We don't always get to do that. We have to base kind of a little bit of what we do is what I think is going to sell. And then I'd say maybe like every 1 in every 8 beers, I can sneak something in that I think will not sell whatsoever. But I, as a brewer, want to do it and see it put on. I really would love to do like an English dark mild soon. I think my wife vetoed that the last time I suggested it, but yeah, we have a Czech Pils that I just kegged. Really excited about that. So anytime I get to do something that's like, yeah, an ode to like something that I grew up drinking, and I'm trying to replicate that or improve upon it, that's really cool. But I'm into it all. Like I think there's nothing that doesn't excite me. The whole experience has been exciting thus far.
All right, well, that's all the questions I have for now. I did see, before we get started in the beer tasting, I did see that Tom had his hand up. So I want to make sure that I do reach out to you there, Tom. What do you have?
Oh yeah, I just had a question about your record keeping when you first started. It looks to me like you've gone leaps and bounds from I'm going to say over the last 10 or 15 years on your career. But when you were first starting as a home brewer, what kind of records did you keep? And how did that help you?
Yeah. Like I said, when I started, it was a lot of like kits. So it's almost prescribed for you in a way. As I made the jump to like all grain, I started taking a little bit more detailed like notes. And especially when it hit recipe development, every detail that I thought was relevant, I would keep. And then after the homebrewing phase, when I went to class, I kind of was introduced to the concept. I mean, I had been using like Beersmith, for example, for a lot of my stuff. Currently, I use a program called Brewfather, but I also keep paper records. But I was introduced to like the brew sheet as a means to really track like what you're doing, which I mean, Beersmith has that built into it, but if you go to any commercial brewery, they're going to have a clipboard at each fermenter tracking like the fermentation schedule and the racking log and stuff like that. So I think as I've grown as a brewer, the amount of paperwork and documentation I've had to do is increased as well. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah, but it sounds like you're happy with that. Like you've learned from that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because you can go back and you think something went like haywire, you can go back and reference that specific beer and say, okay, well, like maybe I didn't hit this number, or maybe I mistimed something. And I think that's where documentation is really important from a consistency standpoint. If you're rebrewing recipes, certainly, but also just as from a process standpoint, like if you want to know how to improve a specific process, that data is going to inform what you might be able to change and make improvements.
Yep. Oh, thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Right on. Why don't let's go ahead and get into the beer tasting, Matt. So why don't you go ahead and lead us off on this next portion?
Yeah. So I'm gonna I have a little like visual like slideshow that's gonna accompany it. So I'm just gonna request sharing if that's cool with you, Ray. Oh no, it says it's disabled. You might need to change it on your end.
Here we go. All right, give it a shot.
Cool. All right. So can everyone kind of see that slideshow, or at least the first slide of it?
Yep.
Okay. There we go. Yeah, so I guess when I selected this beer for the tasting, it was with the intention of talking a little bit to you guys about our method or our approach to pairing hops, which in this scenario it relates because it's so hop forward. It's a hazy pale ale, but it doesn't have to be limited to that style. And my hope as homebrewers is that some of what I might talk about here is relatable. If it sounds like I'm reading off notes at certain times, I'm hoping you guys will cut me some slack because I'm a brewer and this is not a TED Talk. So just bear with me, I guess.
All good.
Yeah. So I think two of the biggest traits of really any like commercial brewery is going to be consistency and quality. For larger breweries, it usually translates to like making flagship products that have a consistent taste from batch to batch. And for smaller breweries or even home breweries like us collectively, there's challenges that come with making consistent beer because there's so many variables at play. So because of this, I think our approach has been up to this point to put the real emphasis on quality. And that's not to say that consistency is not important. It still is. When we do repeat a recipe, it's definitely got to be consistent, or better yet, it has to have been improved in some way. So that's kind of like, I guess, our ethos or our approach when it comes to the balance between the two. Up to this point at Audacity, we've released almost exclusively new beers. I think we've only rebrewed 2 recipes thus far. One is a Kolsch, and one is our fest beer that we released in September, which was also the first beer that we ever brewed. So the benefit of that model is that we can stoke interest, our customers' interest regularly, because we offer something new. But the more that we sacrifice the consistency and the lack of having flagship beers, the more that the quality has to be there. The thought being that that if there's a quality product, it might make up for the fact that someone's going to come back into the tap room and not see what they enjoyed a few weeks prior. So like, to us, it's a matter of building trust with our clientele. They need to be able to trust that when they come in, they might not see something they've had before, but the hope would be that they know or have a confidence that it's going to be good or of quality. So one of the challenges faced by smaller breweries is definitely the availability of raw materials. Water and yeast tend to be more reliable. There's controls in place. So for water, you're probably going to have a municipal authority that regulates the water in some way. And yeast is lab grown, lab controlled. So there's checks in place, but grain and hops tend to be more, at least historically, they tend to be more volatile, or especially in the case of hops, they're subject to increased demand. So whatever the flavor of the month hop is, sometimes we have a tough time tracking that down. Many of the larger breweries, they'll purchase hops by contract, which means they're guaranteed contractually access to hops. And if they're building or rebrewing flagship beers, it makes sense that they're going to want to have access to the hops that they need to accommodate that. All of the hops that we buy for Audacity are on spot, meaning like we basically just go to a marketplace, and if it's there, it's there. If not, we're out of luck. So there's no guarantee that what we want is going to be available for purchase. In many ways, I think that this mirrors homebrewing, because a lot of people that are sourcing materials through homebrew shops or online vendors, or in the case of a lot of GEBL members, I think Jim helps out with that quite a bit. But I think what I'm getting at is like flexibility is key. But at the same time, I'd like to make a more calculated approach when I can, in terms of like sourcing stuff. And especially for a brewery, I have to plan out months in advance my ordering in order to ensure that there's no stoppage in the production side of things. A lot of times, style is going to dictate what hops are called for. There's definitely something to be said, like I touched on earlier, about a well-made traditional beer. But also, like I touched on, the number of breweries is like at an all-time high for the US. It has been continuously growing. So I think differentiation, especially for smaller breweries like us, is like, we put a lot of stock into that. So when it comes to differentiation in hops, most people, they go right to IPA, just because it's so hop forward. They also happen to be what we sell the most of at the brewery. I don't know if that's consumer tastes in this locality or if it's like a chicken and an egg scenario where we brew a lot of IPAs and that's what people come to us for. But we're happy to accommodate as long as we're getting some business in the door. So as a result of that, I've started to place more of an emphasis on like how I pair hops. When I'm developing an IPA recipe, usually I'll determine like what type I'm gonna do. So it could be a West Coast, a hazy, a juicy, a modern, a session IPA, you know, any of the 18,000 IPA subsets. This, when I have a style or a type in mind, that's going to factor into yeast selection as well as hop selection. In terms of yeast selection, the normal attributes would be like attenuation, flocculation, ester production, and then more recently biotransformations in the mix. So once I've established the grain bill and I've selected a yeast, that's kind of then the next step is hop selection. In the past, and even commercially, like I tend to gravitate towards like name recognition. Like I have a familiarity with a range of hops, and I know either from past experience or from having someone else's product that if you pair Citra with Mosaic, like chances are you're going to end up with a pretty good pairing. Or sometimes, like, and this doesn't happen all the time, but if it's before I place a big order, sometimes I'll brew with what's on hand in the cold storage. And this kind of harkens back to like days where as a home brewer, you kind of just raid your your fridge for whatever you have lying around, and you kind of make a kitchen sink hop forward beer. But like I said, like we're kind of now to the point where I'd prefer to be more calculated in selecting what hops are going to go into a specific beer. So in the short amount of time we've existed, I've kind of geared our hop pairing to be one of three, like I call them paths. The first being accentuation. So what I'm looking for here is that I'm emphasizing one specific aroma or flavor to come through. An example of that would be like orange pith. So you could go with Sabro and Amarillo for that example. There's no guarantee that that's what you're going to end up with in the finished product, but just with having a knowledge of what those hops lend most of the time, you're setting yourself up for a better chance of success. The second path would be supplementary. So with this, I'm emphasizing a specific set of aromas or flavors. This would be, the example I have here is like tropical fruits. So it doesn't have to be any one specific note, but you might have a bouquet of tropical fruit. So papaya, lychee, mango. So you select hops that are supplementary to achieving that end. And the third path will be complementary. So what you're doing there is you're taking sets of aromas and you're merging them together to get a little bit of complexity. So a classic example of this would be like in a West Coast IPA with citrus and pine, or you could do like floral and earthy. It really just depends on what you're looking for, and going back to like style will affect this, and really what you're hoping for in the end product. And so I think now we can taste the beer. I've talked long enough. So if everyone wants to crack the crowler, if you have one, feel free to pour it Yeah. So what I was going for with this, admittedly, didn't turn out exactly how I wanted. I was really shooting for like a melon bomb. Having brewed quite a bit with Strata in the past, I know that strawberry is a predominant note that comes through, especially with Imperial Juice, which is the yeast strain that I chose for this. I went with a hazy pale because on our draft list, we had a baseline like hazy IPA up. We've had a double hazy IPA up for a while, and we have a West Coast. So I wanted to fill a void that was maybe something a little bit more sessionable, but also something that the pairing path lines up with the accentuation part of it, because the other ones that we have on more fall into the supplementary category. So it's kind of just showing a range of possibility. Ironically though, what I wanted to come through, like I had hinted earlier, is melon. I figured that with a name like Hool Melon, that would be the predominant note that comes through. I've never brewed with that before. I've had commercial examples where melon did come through, but I didn't really do my due diligence in that because the other note that comes through quite a bit in that hop is actually strawberry. So what I ended up doing was creating a beer where strawberry is at the forefront, and then there's more minute or supportive notes of like honeydew or generic melon. So I mean, I still think it turned out okay, but it's not what I was hoping for. But that's brewing. So yeah. Does anyone get anything else out of this? I know it's been sitting in a crowler for a week, so it might be all over the place, and everyone tastes a little different. So, but if you guys have any notes that are coming through, like hitting you, yeah, let me know.
I think I certainly get the honeydew.
Yeah. Are you just trying to make me feel good?
No.
I won't tell you what I smell, Matt.
Oh, geez.
Oh, great.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
It
I
definitely
think
has
I
a
do
dank
get the
note.
strawberry. Oh, go ahead.
It definitely has a dank note.
Yeah, and I think it comes out, the more it warms up, the dankness comes through a little bit more. So mine's been sitting since the start of the meeting, and I can tell you that it's coming through a lot more.
Yeah, I think it almost covers up the honeydew and the strawberry a bit.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I don't mind a dank beer, so.
Yeah, we were just commenting on the dankness as well. A little grapefruit, almost.
I definitely get some grapefruit.
It's pretty good.
I think
what
I get
hops would you
grapefruit as
use
well.
on this?
Grapefruit as well, Tom.
Yeah, because I had to run back up to Jim's and get 2 more of these because mine are all gone. No, this is very tasty.
Thank you.
I was just curious, Matt, when you did the fuel hop edition, was it primarily dry hopping or late edition?
Oh yeah, let me touch on that. So when I'm doing most of my stuff that's hazy, I won't do any boil additions. It's all Whirlpool. On this specific one, I went half and half. I think it was a pound of each, pound of Strata, pound of Hool Melon, and we do a gallon wise, it ends up being, I think, 67 gallons in kettle. Our hope is to net like between 2.5. I double batch every week, and the hope's to net like 2.5 to 2.83 barrels from that after transfer and fermentation and dropping cone and all that. And then on the dry hop side, for my hazies, Sometimes I'll stagger additions. I try, in order to take advantage of biotransformation, I try and get it on active yeast as much as possible without impeding fermentation. So I've gone as early as 3 days. For this one, I did one addition at day 5, and it sat on there for 7 days before crashing. And that was equal as well. I think it was about 5.5 pounds of each. So just over three pounds per barrel.
And my question was really, we had done a project several years ago. My memory's a little bit fuzzy, but we used that hop. The project basically was, we had a bunch of people brew the same pale recipe, so same grain bill, same bittering hop, same yeast. And then we gave everybody a different flavoring hop, if you will.
Mhm.
And the guy that had the Huel hop basically split a 10-gallon batch in half and did one of his hops as a dry hop and one as I think it was either a flame out or a whirlpool.
Yeah.
And one beer was very strawberry and the other was very melon. So
Oh, interesting.
I'm wondering if the addition might have been some of why you got more strawberry and less melon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that kind of touches on what I was going to talk about next. So really, like the future development, I think where I see hop pairings going is people are going to start to pay more attention to the oil composition of specific hops and the interplay with the oil composition and how those oils change through biotransformation. I think that's going to be a big or a key method for people kind of predicting what beer will turn out like in a finished product. You know, the research thus far into that is at the early stages. I know that really big breweries that have in-house research teams, they have a lot of data on this, but they're reluctant to release that type of stuff to the public. So it's only been with the real enthusiasm with hop breeding and new varieties that work really well in hazy IPAs, that I think that people have started to do extensive research on hop oil contribution to the finished product. The tough thing with that is from field to field, just like you know, grapes on a vine, you're going to get differences even if it's the same hop. So because it's a living product, it's got terroir, it's got specific growing conditions that can enhance one or the other. So I think like the kind of what I'm getting at that it is, as brewers, I think there'll be a need for us to continue to educate ourselves and rely on whatever data does come out, whatever research comes out. If that's your thing, I mean, if it's not necessary, but it's something that I'm definitely keen on learning more about. I think when I wanted to talk about how we pair hops, I had this grand vision that I was going to learn everything there was to know about hop oils and the interplay with that. But I very quickly realized that I can't talk on it with any sort of authority. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of information there and a lot of it's speculative.
Matt, are you talking about like the oils in the hop themselves, or getting you're buying hop oils?
No. The oils in the hops themselves. I think they have started isolating hop oils to sell as products.
Yeah.
Personally, as a brewer, that's not something I have an interest in using. Not to say that I'm going to judge anybody that does. I like the idea of still using like plant matter and not just something derived as a product. But no, it's the oils that are in the hop. It's such a small percentage of in terms of amount, but it has a drastic impact on taste and aroma. yeah, that's really what I wanted to touch on, was just like a brief thing about how we pair hops as it relates to like our business model and how that might change in the future. So thank you guys for listening. And if you didn't enjoy it, at least you got to drink some beer, hopefully.
Well, thanks,
You
Matt, for
talked-
walking us through that. Let's go ahead and just open it up to the room for questions.
You know, you talked a little bit about biotransformation. I'm not quite sure what that means.
Yeah.
Can we
So-
quickly take the presentation down? Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Will.
Can we just take the presentation down? See.
Oh, yeah. Let me get it back.
Yeah,
Ray, do you want to
sorry
take
about that.
it back? I'm just gonna hit stop share.
There we go. Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, so biotransformation is when compounds are changed in the course of hops being introduced during active fermentation. So I think the dry hopping regimen is definitely important to that. Like if you want to see the fruits of that, yeast selection is definitely important. Like a lot of like old IPA strains, like San Diego Super, you're not going to see a lot of biotransformative properties from that strain, at least to my knowledge. But there are a lot of strains, especially of English origin, that are very ester forward, that do have those properties. And the dry hopping a little bit earlier onto active yeast is kind of the change in the process that has given rise to the hazy IPA. The yeast esters and the oils are enhanced as a result of that chemical change.
So this might be a really dumb thought. I've had many of them during my learning of brewing, but I'm thinking as well that, and tell me if this is true or just absolute malarkey, but when you put the hops in while there's still active fermentation going on, does it not help as the gases are rising to distribute the hops throughout the process instead of just sitting on the bottom?
Yeah, totally. There's a little bit of agitation component to it. When I do a dry hop addition, I'll usually give that 24 hours to where my blow off is still open. After that 24 hours, in order to try and retain as much aroma as possible, I close that off and then monitor pressure in the vessel. For us, we have a lot of headspace in our fermenters just because we're putting 3 barrels into 5-barrel fermenters. It's the max that I can do. It's why we're really anticipating looking with this upgrade that's coming through, because we'll have less headspace. And my thought is that we'll lose less aroma as a result of that. Hopefully that holds true. We'll see. But at least that's what I'm thinking will happen. But yeah, it does serve to agitate. And there's also speculation. There's a term called hop creep being thrown around. What it suggests is that there's a minute amount of fermentable sugars in the hops that basically reactivate dormant yeast, and you're getting additional fermentation from the hops. So the term, the hop creep, comes from that it could affect dryness or ABV in the finished product. I think the jury's still out on the extent to which that impacts it. But I know that there's breweries that are being really diligent with like gravity readings almost on every stage throughout fermentation. And as that data gets compiled, I'm sure there'll be more like evidence to support one way or the other. It's not something I particularly worry about, but there's there's bigger breweries that do, certainly. But Clint, again, that would be akin to like with like a West Coast IPA. A lot of times what people do is they'll do CO2 charges through like the bottom of the fermenter. The thought being that it's going to stir up the dry hops and get incorporated a little bit more. So it's almost kind of like the same concept, but without having to actually do the CO2 burst, which there's the potential to introduce oxygen. I mean, anytime you open up a tank, it's less than ideal, but sometimes it's unavoidable. But that's a scenario where it is avoidable.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
If you've ever been to Lagunitas, they have a hop cannon. And it's
Oh.
kind of weird to be hanging out in the tasting room and all of a sudden you hear this poof in the background. And then there's just like this aroma of hops that just kind of goes over the tasting room.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
when I dry hop, I just go right in there's a dry hop port. But I've seen like the Sierra Nevada torpedoes that they have. Like there's some cool stuff out there. But they have like their own in-house metal fabrication and engineers and stuff. So maybe one day.
You don't?
So on like dry hopping and yeast management and stuff like that, like pretty much as a home brewer, I'm one and done. Like if I make a hazy IPA, that yeast is out. It's never going to perform again. Do you have success repitching or cleaning or?
You know, we're very much in the same. I'm very much in the same boat as you will. I did repitch one time. Unfortunately, it was when, if you recall, the state lifted the outdoor seating only for a brief period to open air seating, which meant that we could open our garage doors and the temperature inside the tap room went from like mid 50s to like 30s. I had a stuck fermentation, and that happened to be the beer that I had repitched or cone to cone transfer of yeast. So I don't have enough data to see if it was beneficial for us, but I know that's one thing we really want to get for like cost effectiveness. If we can get, we do enough IPAs that I'm practically brewing one every other week. So if we could get a yeast sprint going and almost get like a house strain where it develops character as the generation increases, that's really appealing to me, because that's almost going back to differentiation. Like that's one of the coolest ways to do it, is to have a house yeast, and then you could send that off to a lab and have it isolated and then have it propagated. So I think when we do get full tanks with those 5 barrels, it'll definitely be something we look to do, because it's, like I said, it's just more cost effective. But yeah, everything we do right now is all fresh pitch, which is, if it's a liquid strain, it's really pricey. But I do think that it does have an impact on producing quality beer, so that's why we do it.
And are you using mainly Imperial? I know you mentioned juice, or you just do it as needed.
Yeah, I've done a lot of fermentous stuff, dry stuff. Imperial definitely is the majority of what we do. A lot of Lalamand. I have a new Imperial juice for our hazy IPAs. I've also used Barbarian, which is their Conan derivative. I found that was less pungent than I would have liked. So I only did one beer with it, but that's not to say I won't try it again. There's a dry strain called Verdant, which is isolated London 3 strain out of Cornwall in the UK, from a brewery called Verdant. They basically got a house character, isolated it, and I think it's Lalamand who basically approached them and offered to turn it into a dry yeast. So now that's available. So I'll be trying that in the next few weeks, actually. So I'm really excited because I've heard good things about it. But yeah, it certainly, like playing with yeast is like something I'm really keen on, because I don't want to get stuck in the rut of just using the same stuff all the time, especially if there's a way to improve on it. And I won't really know without trying. There's so many like thiolized yeasts, and there's so much new advancements in that I think it's something we need to be open.
Okay.
Awesome.
Have you used any of the Kavik yeasts?
No, and I'm part Norwegian, so I would love to. I think what I'm doing is I'm waiting until summer, just to be. I have a fermenter that's a 2-barrel non-jacketed fermenter that I hate using because it doesn't have sufficient temp control, or any really, unless I wheel it into the walk-in cooler. But I think that could be a really cool vessel to play around with some Kavik stuff. Just because the range is much higher in terms of temperature. So I think we'll probably try and do like a farmhouse interpretation of like a Kavik farmhouse, but we'll also probably work it into some IPAs, definitely.
Awesome. Any other questions from the group?
I'm gonna throw in one more. What the heck? Okay. Other than your own brewery, have you been to any locally that, man, I'm impressed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get to get out a lot. I can say that right when we moved up, we had a stopover in Seattle for a night, and I got to go to Fair Isle Brewing. They're doing a lot of like saisons, wild fermentation. Love their stuff, and I've been fortunate enough to I come up with the excuse like, oh, I need to go get cacao nibs from Theo in Seattle, and then I'll go hit some breweries, so it's still work technically. But so I've gone back to them many times. Their stuff is really interesting, and they're doing a lot of stuff with localized ingredients, and not like ingredients that are typical. I think they did one with carrots. So they're doing some cool stuff, and they partner with a lot of like small producers in the area, and that's always been something that fascinates me. Another brewery that I think is doing some good stuff is Otherlands up in Bellingham. They do, I think they have a big Polish heritage inspiration. So they're doing some like continental lagers as well as saisons, but they're kind of putting their own twist on it. Their food is also pretty good. But that's, yeah, I do try and, like, when I do have free time, I try and hit the other breweries. We've had a lot come into our place and show support, so I try and do the same. But I'm here 7 days a week, so it's tough. So I haven't hit as many as I'd like, but those are the two that kind of stand out to me.
Randy,
Matt.
you have your hands up.
Oh, go ahead. You talked about your the cherry sour, and I know this is getting off topic of your IPA or your pale, but
Oh, I don't care.
there was a term you used that you did for one day, and I can't remember what it was.
Yes, kettle souring.
Kettle.
So
is that something that a home brewer can do?
yeah, definitely. So there's a bunch of different approaches to that. What I opted to go with was, and I think that there's a book by, I think his name's Michael Tonsmeyer, and that book's really good. It's a little dated, but it goes into wild fermentation, but it also has a section on kettle souring. So if you're interested, Clint, I can lend you that book. But essentially what I do is and this was our first go at it. The time constraint is really the problem with where I think this beer ended up, but I bring it up to like 180 degrees with the thought being that, and this is after I transfer from mash, the thought being that it's going to kill any organism. And then I pitch a pure strain of Lacto brevis, which is lactobacillus strain. And I let that sit. I should go back. You have to chill, before you pitch that, you have to chill that back to like 100 degrees. I pitched that pure strain of lactobacillus. Then it's going to ferment out and lower the pH significantly. I think 1 day is the minimum, and that's why there's not a ton of tartness on ours, because I with time constraints, I only have the option of doing 1 day. Moving forward, if we do when we do sours, I'll probably give it at least 2, if not 3. And having the bigger system will let us do that. But then once that souring phase or the kettle souring is complete, I'll bring it up to a boil and then treat it like any other brew. You could also flip that, and you could boil first and then bring it up to a pasteurization temp afterwards. But then that doesn't let you utilize hops. So if you want any sort of bitterness or expression from hop isomerization, I do it the other way. But a lot of sours, you don't need the bitterness component. But hops are lactose really susceptible to hops, so I'd rather not impact that.
And you're leaving it covered or uncovered when you're letting it sit for a day?
I leave it. So in our kettle, I have a lid. I wouldn't call it airtight, but certainly the gas that's being produced through fermentation is going to create a layer there, a layer of protection. But that's why you boil it or pasteurize it on the second phase, so that when you bring it into tank and you pitch a clean strain of yeast, then you're not worried about cross-contamination. As where if you're doing like a wild ale, they'll inoculate from the air. But for a brew like me, I can't risk cross-contamination of equipment. So that's why you see a lot of breweries, if they're mainly like clean beer houses, they'll either have a separate set of equipment, or they will do kettle souring, or they're just extremely diligent with certain pieces of equipment.
I think the book that you were referring to was American Sours.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, Mad Fermentationist. That guy's he's a lot of fun to read up on.
He's legit. His blog, really informative blog. I haven't even read the tip of the iceberg on the stuff he's accumulated, but it's a good read, the book. So
yeah, and if you're looking to do a Pliny clone, he's tried to do a couple of them. So all right, so I really enjoy your approach towards brewing, where you're really like you're exploring. You're not like trying to pigeonhole yourself a little bit. But obviously, doing all these different sorts of experiments and so forth that you're doing, you probably work some crazy hours. And you get out, you get done at the end of the day. You step out. You're tired. You're walking through the alley on your way home, and out of nowhere, this car comes screaming around the corner. It's a DeLorean. It nearly hits you, but it avoids you at the last second, hits a garbage can, and out jumps this Christopher Lloyd looking dude.
okay.
He's wearing a white lab coat, and he says, "Matt, I love your beers. I know you're tired. I know you want to go to sleep, but we've got one night. We're going to go change history. We're going to go back in time, and you get to influence beer however you want, just as long as it's not for your own personal gain." What immediately jumps into your mind?
Say one, just, oh yeah, it's not like I'm visiting myself in the past and just say Bitcoin and then go back to the future. That's a great question. Am I interacting in that sense, or is it just through observation?
You can go influence history. You can go kiss Marty's mom if you want.
I would have loved to have been present the first time Grolsch crafted a Pilsner at Pilsner Urquell. I think that it would have been really cool to just have been around when Ken Grossman was doing his thing in the early stages of Sierra Nevada, for sure. Really, there's so many people like that provided a foundation as a brewer that I look up to. I think you guys just had on Jamil Zainashev last month. That dude for sure is one of them, especially on the homebrewing side of things. But to change anything, I don't think I would, because I'm happy with where things are at right now. Outside of maybe smoothie beers, but those can be okay sometimes too. So I'm all for where things are right now, and I think it's only good things to come. So I don't know that I would change anything.
Great answer.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, to follow up on that. So you've come from Utah, lots of warm territory, lots of wind. Up here, we have a lot of cold and a lot of wind. If
Yeah.
you were to open up your kettles and let the wild yeast show up, what do you think you'd get?
Yeah, I think it would be okay. There's examples in nearby areas that they're doing just that. DeGard in Tillamook is one of my favorite breweries of all time. They have a cool ship up on a raised roof where they'll inoculate overnight. I think Garden Path Fermentation up in Burlington, same deal. So I think it would be good, but there's a lot of it's a different beast than what I do, for sure. So I'd have high hopes, and my hope is that one day we will get to play around with that and not just be limited to kettle souring. But I think we need a much bigger space than where we're at right now.
I'm going to expose my naivete here. So if you were to do this, what kind of a base beer would you start with? Would this be a pale? Would this be an IPA?
No, probably like a wheat base, Berliner Weiss, although those tend to be a lacto pitch, but
excuse me, Jim and Lori, are you listening?
Something pretty light. So you're not competing with malt. That'd be the go-to, but I don't think there's a limit on style. I think that traditionally though, like something with a heavy wheat addition in the grain bill would be preferable.
Yeah, we've had a sour IPA. Do you remember that?
Mhm.
And it was actually really good. And it sounds like my brain I can't compute like what is a sour IPA, but I do remember tasting it and thinking, oh, this is actually kind of good, but I don't know why, because it seems like it won't work.
Yeah, and I think not all the time, but most of the time a sour IPA is going to be that kettle souring as opposed to a wild fermentation.
Yeah.
So like Great Notion Brewing, which now has 2 outposts in Seattle, one in Ballard, one in Georgetown. They do sour IPAs quite a bit, or they'll do like pastry sours, but they don't have a huge output of wild fermentation stuff.
All right. Any other questions from the group?
How did we get so lucky? You are 3 or 4 notches above our pay grade. Thank you for being here.
No, I'm cheap.
And great beer, Matt. Like I love this beer, and it was awesome to hear the whole story about your experience and, how we arrived at this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it's all about for me. I mean, there's certainly a financial component to it, but it's not really how we've approached things thus far. So the ultimate reward is when people come in and they try our stuff and they enjoy it. That's what makes it all worthwhile. So it makes the 7 days a week, long days, worth it in the end. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us tonight, and cannot encourage anyone more to come visit you. You do such great stuff. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
One real quick question. You're still at the location where a Lost Canoe was?
Yeah, absolutely. It might look a little different inside. We put our own kind of touches on the aesthetics, but same location. And we do one knock we get a lot for this location is our parking. But we do pay for, on the building adjacent to us, we pay for the parking downstairs during our business hours. So if you've held off on visiting us because of that, hopefully that changes your mind. But
No, I'll come by tomorrow.
awesome. Thanks, Brent.
Awesome. Thanks again, Matt. Appreciate it. We'll see you soon.
Cool.
Probably this
You're
weekend.
Yeah, this weekend. Take care.
See you, Matt.